For this class in digital logic design using Verilog, we're going to be using Verilog quite a bit. And the trouble is, for the first day, there's just too much. Okay, it's hard to jump straight into the Verilog when we're trying to worry about workflows and accepting assignments and using Box and using Vivado, and there's just a lot. However, what I do want you to start thinking about is the workflow and the concepts behind Verilog. Okay, so Verilog is not like regular programming because you're trying to describe hardware. So the idea of a print statement in hardware doesn't make sense. Okay, so basically with hardware, we are trying to control test signals, all right, that make our designs work. All right, so the thing that I want you to think about, putting this idea in your head, is that there's a separation between test benches. Test benches are software configurations that help us test design that we do over here on the right-hand side. So I artificially put this up as side by side, but I wanted to show you the relationship between test benches and design. Okay, so design is where we actually describe the hardware connections. We're going to talk a lot about that. So for today, don't worry about that. But it is useful to kind of think about this as a block diagram where you have some piece of hardware. In this case, I've got a counter. Coming into the hardware, I have signals. Okay, so I can click on those signals. These are input signals. I have a system clock. We'll learn about those. I have a reset signal. I have an enable signal. And because it's a counter, I have output signals like count and overflow. All right, so you notice I'm looking at this piece of hardware, but I'd also like to control it to make it do something to test it. So when I click on this clock signal, it shows up in the design module as a signal. I've defined this signal. So here's clock. And over here in the test bench in the simulation, I actually have to run the clock. So I have to set up the test bench. We're going to worry about this later, but the point is I'm going to control this clock signal later with the test bench. Okay, same thing with reset. I click here. This is where reset shows up in the description of the hardware. I'm going to have to somehow manage that signal. And you can see it's managed here in the conditions that I walk through to make the hardware work. Okay, so not a lot that I want you to know in terms of the details of how these signals are configured. We're going to get to that in subsequent labs, but I do want to introduce the idea of test benches and design because that's going to matter in terms of how we learn the Vivado workflow in Lab 1. Now, another thing I want to mention, sometimes I say design and sometimes I say RTL. Okay, so RTL stands for register transfer level. That's typically where we conceive of the design to exist at the register transfer level for this class. Okay, so those terms are used interchangeably. And the same is true within Vivado. Sometimes you'll see design files mentioned and sometimes you'll see RTL. Think of those things as closely related. Okay, so that's a quick summary of what I want you to know about test benches versus design.